why is it that people don't want to get present? And I think it's because it sounds like work. Another thing, I'm going to do that. I'm going to add it to my should-do list. Yes, I should meditate because that's going to get me the peace that I want. So I say, well, what if it was more like being seduced by a lover? And that's the thing. That's why I'm excited about this idea, because when we're present, we are naked, like lovers. And that's what I call being naked in the now. And what I mean by that is we momentarily let go of even our thoughts, even our ideas, even our beliefs, and we experience naked beingness, vitality.
Welcome, everyone, to the Spiritual Forum. I'm so glad you're here. I'm excited to introduce my guest today, but first, I just want to remind you of a couple things. Remember my Whole Planet Spirituality Forum and Retreat at Unity Village, October 17th through 20th. You can register at thespiritualforum.org/retreat. Also, if you choose to donate to this podcast, thank you very much. You can do that at thespiritualforum.org. And please rate, review, and become a subscriber on YouTube. My YouTube channel is growing. I'm very proud of that. And let me introduce you now to my guest. Marijke McCandless is an award-winning writer, mindfulness coach, and playfulness instigator who helps people shed their inhibitions and skinny dip in the present moment. Her latest book is Naked in the Now, Juicy Practices for Getting Present. I think this is going to take us to some very, very interesting places, and I'm really excited to have you. Welcome, Marijke.
Thank you, Reverend Carol. It's such a joy to be here. I'm excited to talk with you today.
Yeah, I just think that the titles of your book, Juicy Practices, I think there's going to be a lot of juiciness in this, and hopefully it'll bring people to a spirituality and understanding of the divine and some spiritual practices that are different and that are really connecting. And I'm really excited to learn more about that. But first, why don't we have you, just like I do with my other guests, just share a little bit about your journey and how you got to be, I think you call yourself an awareness practitioner, how you got to be an awareness practitioner and an author of this juicy book.
Thank you. You know, it's always interesting talking about one's journey. You know, how far back do you go and when did it all start? But really, I think for me, the moment that sort of everything that I thought I knew and understood about life, what I thought was real or not, I grew up in a very agnostic family. So we didn't have any religious structure really at all. You know, I think my dad was actually an altar boy or something, but he didn't bring it forward. But even so, as a young child, I had a curiosity about what everybody else was doing, what they were doing at church, what was happening. I can remember when I was 8 years old, I asked my parents for a Bible for Christmas. I ran into this beautiful little Bible, you know, with the date on it the other day. And I think I just had that inner curiosity about what is it that there must be something there. But I didn't find it until my own life kind of turned upside down. And it was a very kind of classic midlife crisis, I guess you might say. My husband and I had been very close and we had this tight relationship. He was going through really tough time. Anyway, how it came out was he had an affair with my best friend.
Mm.
So that threw my life into the unknown, really into the mystery. I felt like the rug had been pulled out from under me. But the same time, there was this deeper understanding that it wasn't just what it looked like on the surface. And when we had a chance to face the issue. Are we going to separate, or are we going to go deeper together? Are we going to kind of investigate what's going on, which at the time I didn't know what that meant. And that's what we decided to do. So we took a very traditional path where we went to a couples therapist. And we also took a less traditional path where we did what was called a year-long love and ecstasy training. And we had little kids at the time, so it wasn't a sustained year, but it was like 3 10-day retreats with little mini sessions in between. But it was on those retreats that we began to learn the principles of meditation and acceptance, the importance of playfulness, and the importance of rapt attention with one another, undistracted attention with one another. However, it was also on that retreat, because you're really vulnerable and stuff comes up, that I began to uncover what had been pressed down pretty far, and it was memories of sexual abuse as a young child, under 5. And these came back in terrifying flashback. So then it was a little bit more understood, in a way, how I could have been also contributing to what kind of was unraveling in our marriage, where I was simply not present for parts of it probably because of my PTSD response to things. So one of the things that helped my husband and I rekindle our relationship, and also helped me begin to really embark on my own personal inward journey, was this sort of devastating revisiting of this time in my life, which didn't really involve my parents at all. It was a friend of the family whose care I was left in sometimes. But my husband showed up just 100% present for me as I was going through these very difficult flashbacks, and I experienced what it's like to have somebody really show up for you. So while, his indiscretion doesn't seem like showing up for somebody, he really did show up for me, and I got to experience what that's like when somebody does hold space for you. So that was kind of the catalyst. But what ended up happening is we really embarked on a deeper journey of meditation, of awareness practice. We studied with several different groups, and eventually we've actually been affiliated with a Quaker group for 20 years. And I really appreciate the Quakers for having very little dogma, but holding the idea that we have the divine spark of God within us. But we also kind of played with people who were studying the mystics, and how the mystics of all religions come back to these same principles. So that's kind of how it evolved. And I like to talk about it a little bit because it was really initially a journey to relationship healing. What I wasn't aware of was how much of an inner journey was required for our relationship to heal as well, and for him to go on his inner journey too. But what I also found out along the way was that this language that is more prevalent in our community, this sort of romantic longings, the connection, that is actually a reflection of our own longing for the divine, which is that divine spark inside of us. And that's kind of what formed the basis for Naked in the Now, because I really got to explore that metaphor. What is it like when we are that which we are seeking? How do we approach that? How do we make it not be about work? I have to sit down and meditate right now, but I want to be seduced by the beloved by God, if you use that word. What does that feel like when I approach it that way? So that, in a nutshell, is how I got here.
That's so interesting. There's so much to talk about in here. And first, I had to say your upbringing, the agnostic family, reminds me exactly of my upbringing. And I was always trying to find ways that I could go to church with my friends and get a Bible and stuff. It's a funny
And
thing. It's a funny thing. All my
yeah,
friends don't want to go to church and hate it. And I'm like clamoring for it. It sounds like you were
totally,
too. Yeah.
totally.
Yeah. I think that I just think that's so interesting. So I took some notes. And first of all, the idea that you and your husband had this break in belonging, for lack of better words, like something shifted
Yeah,
that had to be either addressed or you were going to go your separate ways. And the
yeah,
fact that you committed yourself to the journey together, I think that
yeah,
says so much about each of you and both of you. And then having small
yeah.
children, because I remember having small children and working full time, that you went on 3 10-day retreats. Wow.
It was literally I would have thought that that was an impossible thing to
Right. Yeah.
accomplish. It's only that we somehow knew, kind of both of us knew, if we're gonna do this, we really have to show up for it. And surprisingly, it wasn't all that. It was a very big hurdle in our heads, but our, we had incredibly supportive parents.
Yeah.
And and ultimately had a very supportive workspace, sort of because each of us went to our works and said, we're either quitting or we're asking for time without pay for these periods of time because we've got some stuff we're working on. And our parents just said, we'll watch the kids. I mean, I know that's a privilege, a huge privilege,
Mhm.
but it was one that we were very grateful for. And we were happy that our kids had loving people taking care of them during that time. In a way, it was good for them too.
For sure. And there's so many people who just get stopped at, we can't do that, So,
Yeah.
it just goes to show that power of perseverance and commitment, that when you're really
Yeah.
committed to something and you follow through, that's kind of where the magic happens. The next thing that I wrote down the word rapt attention. I have to say, I haven't heard that combination of words for a long time, but we all yearn for that, don't we? To
Yeah.
be received with rapt attention and also to be that, for somebody else.
Exactly.
I think it's how we humans are designed, but we lost track of what that is, because
Yeah.
we have so many diversions, so many things calling to our attention, and the idea of just giving somebody else rapt attention, what a gift. I mean,
Yeah.
that's a gift, and I'm pointing that out because that seems like that would be a real key to just having a beautiful, fulfilling, and creative relationship, to be able to
Uh,
grant that.
I I totally agree. I think that I love that you picked out that term because that's actually how I began to experience it myself. I was like, oh my goodness, it is in being completely present with this other person. And when you're going through difficult times, being completely present with another person is challenging and rewarding because what's happening, let's say we learned this practice called soul gazing, where you simply hold the attention of your partner as everything's coming up. And it's, I know, my anger is probably coming up, sparkling through my eyes, my shame, my fear. But just to have it received without commentary is is powerful, and to be there for another person like that is powerful, and it's so related to this relationship that we also want to develop with. It's so interesting picking terms. I love the term the beloved or beloved, and I love it because I think of my husband as my beloved, but I also think of that God spark within me as the beloved. And somebody once asked me, I can't remember how it came up, but they used the term holy intimacy. And I wanted to write about that. I wanted to reflect on what that was. And what I came to was that holy intimacy is the union of two commitments. One is being able to be in rapt attention with another person. It could even be you and I in rapt attention. We tend to think of it as our lover, but being able to be there with another person, being in rapt attention, and being able to be in quiet solitude with yourself. If you're always only going out to another person, you miss it. It's kind of a form of rapt attention with yourself, but it feels more like quiet solitude. It feels expansive in its stillness and quiet.
Well, let me first address the terms. I do it
Yeah.
all the time on my podcast,
Yeah.
God, spirit, the great mystery, the Christ
know.
within, so I just, again, invite my listeners to pick whatever word
Yeah,
that works for you.
I
And,
agree.
and I used to hate the word God. Now I love it. So whatever works, wherever you are. But I think that I certainly think that the beloved God, the great mystery, is in rapt attention or grants us rapt attention all the time. And that
Yeah,
what's missing is that we've turned away. And
yeah,
and so that when we turn towards that, then again, that's where miracles happen. But
yeah.
that great spirit, great mystery, source energy is always there in the waiting, in rapt attention for us, just kind of like almost like waiting at the coffee shop. Waiting at the coffee shop for us to come, but we've stopped to shop, and we've stopped to go to a movie, and we've stopped to make dinner and get the kids, and we never quite make it to the coffee shop. Meanwhile,
Yes.
the great mystery is sitting there for us. That's kind of how it looks to me. I love the term holy intimacy, and you talking now, and also your book. It did make me reflect on how sometimes I am reluctant to spend that time with myself. It's
Oh,
like
yeah,
it's so easy to just say or not even know that it's important. Like,
yeah.
even like, okay, like, maybe just you skip your meditation time or your time with your holy altar, or your time reading or whatever it is
Mhm.
that people can set aside for some moments of a day just to be with themselves. It's so easy to say, "Oh, it's okay, I've gotta do this." But what we're really saying is, I mean, it's like we're missing our own date at the coffee shop. We're
Yeah,
we're we're missing being in rapt attention with ourselves and having ourselves and the great mystery being in rapt attention to us. We're discarding that. We're saying that's not that important, and it really
yeah,
is.
yeah. It's funny, Carol, because I can also relate to that. Oh, I don't have time today or whatever. I'm busy. And we are busy. We have busy lives. And one of the, more recent turning sort of insights, I guess, was that I needed to take this concept of time out of this equation because my mind was always going to come up with reasons why I didn't have the time to do
Mhm,
something.
mhm.
But what I discovered is that, so I don't think of it as so much as spending time with myself. I think of it as stopping and dipping into a tiny little moment of delight.
I love that.
And it's thing is that, so I'm in the middle of a pretty tough time right now. Our family is dealing with a pretty challenging medical mystery that's calling for a lot more of my physical time and attention. But because I have this practice, I counsel myself, it's not about the time. You can spend literally 5 seconds and even just saying that, all the hair on my arm stands up. And I know the truth of that. When you dip into a tiny little moment of presence, you are right there experiencing that rapt attention of the divine, of the mystery of the universe, evolving consciousness, whatever it is that you relate to that. And I can find 5 seconds.
Yeah.
I can find 5 seconds. I can find 1 minute. And it's dipping into that again and again that we begin to experience the seeping through of that rapt attention of the divine just being there. And it's not about every single moment. We couldn't live our lives every single moment being there. It's just about tapping into it, remembering, feeling it, experiencing it, feeling supported by it, resting in it.
Yeah, and I wanna get it in a little bit into some of the, practices that you can share with our listeners,
Yeah.
but before that, I wanna come back to you talked about the Quakers, and you talked about
Mhm.
the mystics, and I went to an interfaith seminary. I have 2 ordinations, but one of them was interfaith, and we did study the mystics because, I mean, it's so alluring, so beautiful.
I
It's yeah.
know.
So it's so different than everybody else, and it is kind of a love affair, and
It
being
is.
so fully present with the divine and the writings of, like, the Sufis, like Rumi, and there's it's just it's like dancing with this beloved, and I think that Western people are kind of like, "What? What
Yeah.
what is that?" And it's so, there's some bridge that has to be built or some way to bridge the gap between the Western way of approaching the divine, because so many in the traditional Christian Judeo religions are all about, this God is just this massive, amazing thing way outside me that
Yeah.
am waiting for judgment, or I have to fear, or that's just so beyond
Right.
me, and I am just this little sinner and things like that. It's not what we teach in Unity, which is my other ordination. We also teach the divine is within and also immanent and also transcendent, but not that judging God. But the mystics is still different. It's that intimacy, It's that
Yes.
it's that
Yes.
it's that's why I love the title of your book, Naked in the Now, because it is like getting naked, that vulnerability, that much
Exactly.
vulnerability. And I think people get
Exactly.
really uncomfortable with that. It's not
Yeah.
how our culture is. So how do we bridge that gap of our culture?
But that's why I use this language of human intimacy. Because when I was sitting down and writing parts of this book and thinking about how to describe it and things like that, I I really wanted to, because it came intrinsically to me to describe it this way, and I wanted to try to explain it quickly. Why have I used this term? Why am I pointing to naked? And so the term naked, I mean, it immediately makes us feel vulnerable, possibly shameful, possibly too exposed. But it has another side to it too. It has the juiciness, the exploration, the willingness to be present. So when I got really quiet and I was writing this book and then about it, I was like, what I believe that people truly desire in their life is to be present for it. You know, sometimes that's a hard pill to swallow if being present means dealing with a medical emergency with your family or whatever.
Mhm.
But still, we know those rich moments when your baby's born, when you're married, those moments when we are intimate with the moment and with whoever is there with us. So I was thinking, why is it that people don't want to get present? And I think it's because it sounds like work. Another thing, I'm going to do that. I'm going to add it to my should do list. Yes, I should meditate because that's going to get me the peace that I want. So I say, well, what if it was more like being seduced by a lover? And that's the thing. That's why I'm excited about this idea, because when we're present, we are naked like lovers. And that's what I call being naked in the now. And what I mean by that is we momentarily let go of even our thoughts, even our ideas, even our beliefs, and we experience naked beingness, vitality. And, if you've ever fallen in love and you have that moment where you're ready to physically explore with one another. Typically, I mean, of course, there's all kinds of scenarios. I'm talking about the scenario when you're like, I'm gonna, expose myself. We're excited. We're playing. We're not overly obsessing or worried. We're just in the moment and playing. And we are somewhat exposed and pretty vulnerable. And it's messy. There's like saliva here and whatever. I mean, it's like your hair's going like this or whatever. And it's okay. We're not buttoned up. We're in the vitality of life unfolding. And that's why I love the example, the metaphor of our human intimacy to help us get there with the divine, to open up to the possibility of even if your God is here, to open up to that, to be available for a moment to that. Yeah. And everybody has all different kinds of beliefs that they've grown up with. And maybe those conditions, maybe those beliefs still serve you. And I think my measure would be whether your beliefs are alleviating your suffering and the suffering of other people around you, or are they possibly contributing to suffering and the suffering of people around you? And maybe then it's time to investigate whether you're ready to let go of a certain belief. That one's no longer serving me anymore. My husband has to be this exact way or I won't love him. That was simply not true. I didn't know that before.
Yeah,
Anyway.
yeah. Well, I have to share something that came up for me while you were talking.
Yeah.
This is a idea hot off the press.
Okay.
Okay. So what came up for me was the story of the Garden of Eden and Eve
Oh,
not being
yes.
like, okay, so the whole thing with the serpent, whatever. They were naked. They were naked,
Yes.
and then they couldn't be naked. They had to cover
Oh,
themselves up because there was some unwillingness to be present with the divine. Like there's some
yes.
I can't be totally vulnerable with you
Yes.
anymore. And like that is like the original mistake.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow. That's pretty good,
I
Reverend
know.
Carol.
Just
I
it just
have
came up to
never
me. Yeah.
that's really good.
It's really interesting to think about. Like there was before they were completely willing to be vulnerable, and then now I'm not. And so we've been kind of clamoring back to that all this
Yeah.
time. I mean, you can take the story literally or figuratively, but I do think
Yeah.
the human condition, you did share that we have this yearning. We have this
Yeah.
yearning to be close to the divine. And
Yeah.
and yet we have to accompany that with this willingness to be present and to be vulnerable, to be so vulnerable. And so that's something that humanity, I always think that humanity is trying to get back to that Edenic garden, but that's part of
Totally.
it too, is that willingness to be so present.
Part
That's
of why I encourage people to do it in tiny pieces. Instead of thinking, oh, I have to completely be vulnerable and expose myself and be out there. Be eventually, but maybe for right now, we'll just dip in for a moment,
put your toe in the
just
water.
leave a toe in the water, skinny dip one toe in the water, see how that feels.
Yeah.
Um, gain our own experience of it, our own direct experience of it, because ultimately what informs us deeply is our own direct experience with something, not what
Sure.
somebody else
Yeah.
says.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so let's talk about do you want to talk about some practical exercises to connect with the divine, or is this something else you want to talk about first?
Yeah,
Okay.
no, I think it's a great idea. I was thinking, let's see, I do want to talk about this one practice. And actually, it's a practice that many different religions or spiritual organizations have, and they call it different things. And I learned it under this one wing that we were doing at the time. It was training through the Ishayas. And I learned it as I think I just learned it as the love technique. But anyway, but what I came to appreciate it as being called in other traditions is prayer in the heart. Prayer was not something, because you know I grew up as an agnostic. I didn't have experience with what praying was. I mean, I can remember going to church with my 11-year-old friend or whatever. And she went to this big Catholic seminary church. And, it was my first time. And there's a lot of kneel here and sit back and kneel and whatever. And we came to this point where we were kneeling and she said that the person said, we're going to pray. And so I was like, okay, I didn't really even know what the word meant, but I was like, I prayed for all of the hungry children to be fed in the world I was like these big prayers for to alleviate suffering. And my friend afterwards turned to me and she said, what'd you pray for? And I was like, oh, I prayed for the hungry children to be fed. She's like, what? She's like, I prayed for a Barbie, you know? Praised like because she was done. I mean, it was rote for her, So anyway, I don't have a lot of experience with prayer, but I learned this technique as it has this component to it. And I think it's really important. It goes back to what you were saying about the term that works for us, whether it's God or the beloved or the universe or whatever it is, the great mother. So in order to do this very simple, 5 or 10-minute practice, you need to select what I call an awe word. So it's a single word or a short phrase that captures the idea of how you feel when you're in awe. So for some people, this word is God, but it has to have no negative baggage attached to it, 0. So if by chance you have some conditioning that led to some negative conditioning about the word God, don't use God. That's not the right term for you now or whatever. So some people might say truth or beauty, or I can tell you my first one was evolving consciousness because, that's a mouthful. Now my awe word is beloved. So anyway, you select one awe word. Your mind will tell you you have to find the right one, but you can change it. For this session, you choose one. And just to make it can be lighthearted. My, 10-year-old daughter, she was learning this technique and she chose the word crepes because in her mind, the coolest thing on the planet was eating crepes. So crepes was her awe word. So you could be lighthearted. It doesn't have to be all big and heavy and the perfect word. It's just a word that lights you up for a moment. Sunset, whatever, stars, moon. And you allow that word to rest in the center of your chest. If you're a visual person, you can visualize it there. And you gently, quietly to yourself, repeat that word with the idea that it's less resting in the center of your chest. So it's very powerful. It's very sweet. And you needn't, I always set a timer when I do these things, but you needn't set a timer for even 20 minutes. Just do it for 3 minutes. Just rest with this awe word in your chest for a few minutes. Be a scientist, be an engineer. I read you were an engineer and surrounded by engineers, Enter with a little curiosity. Oh, interesting. What happened? You can put your hands on your chest if you want. Sometimes that helps. Sometimes I would add the word and then the word to it. But, I like the way that vibrates in my chest, but I don't always. Just a simple prayer in the heart. You're not asking for anything. You're not offering anything. You're simply experiencing that awe word in the center of your heart.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think the heart is the space where we have that intimate connection with the divine.
Yeah.
I just got back from a convention where it was a unity convention. We had lots of different ways to get continuing education credits, but most of it was experiential. And I went to this
I
one
love that.
workshop it was so great, about a spiritual practice that kind of took the Trinity in a way, that the personal relationship. Some people think God is very transcendent, something way beyond, and others think very personal, have a personal conversation, and others think it's within you. So those are kind of the three aspects.
Mhm.
But the heart was that personal relationship, that personal connection. And then the gut was like the voice inside. And then the crown of the head was like the transcendent, but that you couldn't really
Yeah.
access the transcendent mystery, source, God, until you cleared, had clear heart connection and a clear gut connection. But
Yes.
I love that. I mean, you have another practice too, where you just kind of like, you love yourself, right?
The loving presence one, the 5
I,
seconds of presence.
well,
I don't is that the one you're thinking
I
of?
was thinking
Or
of one where you're kissing yourself, or you're hugging yourself,
oh, the
or
kissing yourself
yeah,
all over.
that's what
Yes,
I was thinking.
totally. I mean, it's such a lovely way to think about it. It actually, it's a very common sort of meditation technique where you do what might in another term be called a body scan, where you're just moving your attention, you're practicing moving your attention back to your body. The thing is that when we are embodied and in our body and not thinking about something, when we're in our body, we are completely present
Hmm.
because our senses only exist right now, like Adam and Eve in the garden, right now. So a lot of times there's techniques that bring us back to the body. And I like to think of it as what happens when I give myself that kind of attention. When I kiss my head and my forehead and you work all the way down your body and you literally discover the power of attention, that rapt attention we were talking about, onto yourself, onto the embodied human being, and how much it responds to that kind of attention, even if it's just your own attention.
Yeah, I think that's so
And
beautiful. I was just going to say that people deflect that, you know,
Mhm.
like I can give attention to you, but not to me.
Yes.
And so that's
Yeah.
why the exercise is so important.
Yeah, because there's a couple of things about that. I mean, ultimately, we are our own best companions in life. We are who walks next to ourselves throughout this life. With, yeah, with the divine there as well. But so it's really a good to remember, especially if we're a very giving person, a very, really willing to put it out there, to include this human being. Sometimes if you think of it as this human being instead of me,
Hmm.
because
Hmm.
if you just think of it as this embodied human needs that same loving kindness. That's what helps us. Sometimes we have to say yes to directing loving kindness to us, which might mean no somewhere else. Mm.
Yeah, it's always important to fill ourselves up first, and it's always kind of the last thing that we think about often. And
Yeah.
and then also I think there's also this underlying tape or conversation that I'm not deserving, or I'm not worthy, or I
Yeah.
can't bring attention to myself. I have to deflect it. And again, I think that's Eve in the garden. I'm thinking more and more about this. It's
I
like
love that.
that's I know, and that's really at the core of a lot of our issues, that we can't
Yeah.
be that vulnerable, and even with ourselves. And I was thinking
Yeah.
how much attention I give to my dogs, or if you have
Right?
cats, how much
Yeah.
attention, how much I'm constantly like petting them, and how much I'm just, just kind of loving on
Yeah.
them, and their little scruffy ears and all that. And it's like, that occurred to me this morning. It's like, I could do that to myself.
I know. I know. I know. It's funny. It just reminded me of, anyway, of another practice that I talk about in the book. And it reminds me because I actually have a line about your pets in it. So in some of the traditions, it's very popular to practice what they call a breath meditation. And of course, there are breath meditations where you intentionally control your breath. Like it's a good calming anti-anxiety thing where you breathe in for 5, hold for 5, breathe out for 10 or something like that. But I'm talking about the breath meditation where you're instructed to just follow your breath. Just follow your breath. And for so many years, I couldn't do it. I was more used to a little bit of a mantra, like this prayer in the heart thing. And I would notice that I would control my breath. Like I would immediately be controlling my breath. And I would think to myself, God dang it. All day long, my body is breathing completely on its own without the help of my head at all. And yet, as soon as I turn my attention to it, the head wants to get involved and figure out what rate it should be all of this stuff. And I was really bound and determined I wanted to be able to watch myself breathe. I just thought that would be fascinating if I could just watch myself breathe. And I couldn't without controlling it. So my husband was very sick at the time. I decided that I was going to practice by matching his breath because I had no idea what rate his breath was going to be at. So I would just have to be following his breath. And I think of him as my beloved also. So I was following the breath of my beloved in him. However, I've also done it with my pet, and other people have done it with their pets, where they practice this breath meditation by just matching the breath of their cat or their dog or whatever. Well, for one, it's an incredibly the other person or obviously the pet, they don't have to know you're doing this. And it's still really intimate to match the breath of something that you love. So I would do it that way first. And then eventually I was like, okay, what if I was my own lover? Like I almost imagined there was 2 of me. And now I was just watching my inner beloved self breathing. And that turned the key for me. I was able to just watch my breath. And what was fascinating about it is that it it gave me this based from sort of the self-absorbed I. The self-absorbed I is the one who either is just lavishing stuff on themselves or is like, no,
Mhm.
I don't deserve it. I know I need to spend my attention elsewhere. I can do more good somewhere else, whatever it is. But developing that knack of allowing ourselves to be part of the people that we give something to, part of the huge pool. It's not that we don't stop giving to others, but just a little piece of the pool that we give to. I had to develop the knack of not being so intertwined with that egoic existence. And that this was one of the practices that helped me, which started with matching the breath of a pet or a,
That's
a
interesting.
partner.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's interesting. I think you're right. I think that the self-absorption has the 2 sides to the same coin. One is it's all
Yeah.
about me, and one is it's not about me, but both are
Yeah.
self-absorbed. I think that's
Yeah.
interesting to think about. What else should we talk about? I think one of the things that occurred to me is, while we're talking, is what if we're the only ones here? I mean, like, there's all these
Yeah.
people that we're kind of focusing on, but ultimately, I'm in a lot of prayer and coaching conversations in my line of work, and ultimately, I always say, it kind of just comes down to when you're having problems with relationships or people, this and that. Whatever troubles you have in your life, it ultimately comes down to you and the beloved, or you and God, you and the divine.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
ultimately, when we take our last breath, even if we're surrounded by lots of people, ultimately that journey is our own journey. And our birth was
Yeah.
our own journey. And our life is our own journey. And to me, that
It's
just
true.
makes it even more important for us to
Yeah.
be intimate with ourselves and give ourselves attention and love ourselves. And then that is a way for me, that is a way to express my appreciation for the divine. The
Yeah.
divine created me. however you believe that came to be. And so the divine would relish in my giving myself rapt attention and loving myself and bringing myself fully and being present with myself and being vulnerable. That's what also honors the divine or the beloved. So this is really important
Totally.
work.
Yeah. When you were talking, I had two thoughts. Actually, three things came to mind. I remember I might have already said this sentence in our talk, but I remember a turning point for me, and it happened during it's like a spiritual coaching call. I had a kind of a spiritual coaching call, so to speak, and I must have been going through a tough time or whatever, but I was present with this woman and talking it through, and I remember blurting out, "I'm just a sweet woman longing for the divine." And the words came out of my mouth without them being formed or thought about, because I wouldn't have ever referred to myself, first of all, as a sweet woman. And I was like so embarrassed of like, well, I don't know if I'm a sweet woman or not, but it was so kind to me who was struggling at that moment. Oh, and it it lit me up inside. I was like, oh, I am just a sweet woman longing for the divine, even if I fall down and mess things up and botch things or whatever, or I'm not kind or whatever it is. Ultimately, inside, that is what I am. And that little phrase just was such a key moment for me to offer myself a little bit of a break, I guess. And another practice was that I have actually morphed a little bit now, was to record a love letter to yourself. You can use your phone probably has a recording device. Actually record a love letter to yourself. That's fascinating. But I've morphed it even more. I say, record a love letter to what you think of as one of your worst traits, or maybe what other people tell you is your worst trait, because we're really hard on ourselves. And the thing is that even our worst traits, they have developed as our best coping mechanism for something. Maybe they're not skillful means. Maybe they're not the best approach, but if we can honor that we're trying to cope with what may be a very difficult situation for this being in life, then it wiggles loose a little bit. Because there's part of us that wants to be acknowledged and validated, even if we're doing all the wrong things. We aren't doing them in a vacuum. We're doing them because some part of us has either experienced it as helpful in the past or believes it to be helpful now. And if we can just acknowledge it and honor ourselves a tiny bit, what I found is that we make room to change. We make room to, maybe that particular method isn't working as well for me. I'm going to try something else, because we trust ourselves a little tiny bit. We aren't just mad at ourselves for doing the wrong thing all the time. Oh, I ate that butter cake again. Well, probably we needed some form of comforting in that moment. Anyway.
It's an interesting approach to like shadow work. I want to comment I'm just a sweet woman. I want to comment because that's a prayer. I don't know if you know that, but that is a prayer. Yes, that's a prayer. Yeah. Okay. So that's a prayer. So this is how we teach it. In Unity, we teach affirmative prayer. So any I am statement, any truth statement that is I am is a prayer. I am a sweet woman. That's declaring yourself, your truth. You're standing you're standing naked before the divine and saying, I am a sweet woman. It's very vulnerable, but it's a truth statement. Yeah, it's a truth statement. And that's a prayer. See, prayers aren't always like, oh, help me, help me, help me, when you do help me prayers, you're standing apart from the divine. But when you speak affirmatively, like an I am, you're standing in the midst of the divine and stating what the divine sees. So you're a prayer. Exactly. You're a good prayer.
Oh, this is fantastic. I love it when I get, kind of like this structure for something that happened organically. It's
Yeah.
like, that's exactly what my experience was, is that I was seen. I was seen. And I happened to be the one saying it, but it just I felt seen, even as I simultaneously felt unworthy to be seen.
Yeah, it's like you're stating how God sees you or
Yes.
the beloved sees you. You're stating
Yes.
the truth and you're validating that for yourself. So there's something really magical that happens, not just when you say the words, because the words can be just shallow, but when you really, really are speaking from a place of, I'm
Yes.
speaking my truth, it's a whole different thing. And
Exactly.
yeah, I love that. I would have deflected too. It's like, wait a minute, I'm not sweet. It's an
My husband
adjective.
might not say that.
It's not an adjective. I'm usually attribute to myself. But I also know I can see this. I can claim that for myself too. You claimed it for
Yeah.
yourself. I can claim that for myself too. I do have a sweetness to me. It's not what
Yeah.
I would characterize myself as, but that doesn't mean it's not true. So,
Yeah.
when you say that and if I say that, we're affirming the divine's, impression of us. So I just thought that was really cool. I like that.
Thank you for saying I'm a good at prayer.
You're good at prayer. Well, this is the thing. I know. I grew up the same way, not knowing I didn't know how to pray. My family never mentioned God, never prayed once. We didn't even do grace at
Right.
Thanksgiving. I- we didn't even do that. So, it's just so interesting that I've taken the path that I have because I
Me
remember,
too.
yeah, right. Prayer though was like, I don't know how to do that. Other people are good at that. And when you just learn that you're really just speaking truth and it's not about
Yeah.
how the words flow or that we're asking for anything, just, I am God's beloved. I love that prayer. I am God's beloved,
I
you
love
know?
that too.
And I affirm
Yes.
that for you. I affirm that for everybody who's listening. You are God's beloved. That's a prayer.
Yeah.
And that's a good one to take through, your whole day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's kind of like that prayer in the heart. You can
Yes.
just add I am to it, and it's the same thing, really.
Yes. Right. Right. Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So we are coming near the ending of our
Yeah.
really, really organic conversation. I've had a couple of revelations myself during this, so it's been really, really great for me. I want to give you the last word, though. I want to make sure that we've covered, your book covers a lot. And I think it's very,
Yeah.
very, very unique. And I think the idea of vulnerability and being naked before our inner selves and the divine and our beloved, our partners and everything, just that vulnerability, it makes me think if we could each do that like 5 minutes a day or something, I think the whole world would change.
I know. That's what I know. And once you start experiencing a tiny bit of it, you want it with, meeting you. I want to have that with you for a moment or whatever, or the next person, because the authenticity feels so present and good. And I don't have to be perfect. I don't,
Right,
and
right.
I don't have to know all the answers. I can just be whatever I am.
It's the only thing we can
I can
be.
just be
This is
whatever
the
I'm.
thing. It's like,
Yeah.
having all the none of us have the answers anyway. So why even try? Why do we even put all of this armor on us? Because it's just so heavy.
Yeah.
And to meet other people, to meet everyone out there by just taking our armor off and saying, this is who I am, and I see who you are.
Right.
How could we ever like go to war then? I mean, why would we ever be
No.
rioting in the streets? Why would we be calling people's names? Why would we be saying that, demanding that people meet my needs? We would just be. We would just be. Yeah. Okay, sorry. I said I'd give you the last word, so now I am.
Oh, I don't know that I have. I love those last words. Okay. I was like, that's really good to end it on. Just
There we
be.
go.
Uh,
Yeah, just
Yeah.
be. I mean, if you want to have any message that you want to just give people now, what would be your
So
overall
so
message?
okay. I think just like we have to learn to be when with our lover, I think the number one thing to do is to relax. Just just to practice for that's why I tame it down to small moments. Just relax for a moment, because that's really from that space is where authenticity comes. Doesn't come from armoring ourselves and preparing. Comes from relaxing back into whatever is right here. My last article was called Muddling Through: How to Find Balance Between Striving and Grace. And it's powerful when we approach life that way. So I would say that's the most important thing to practice. If you do nothing else, just relax. If you want to relax and put a little prayer in your heart for 1 minute a day, great. That's perfect. And then I would say, if I was going to add anything to it, I would add a pinch of curiosity and a dose of willingness. Because that's when we have a little bit of curiosity and a little bit of willingness, and we're relaxed, not incredibly anxious and striving, that's when we open ourselves to a different way of seeing and a different way of being. And it doesn't have to be forever. You can dip into it for 5 seconds, and you'll just begin to become addicted to the 5-second moments of delight, and you'll have your own little spark to look forward to.
I love that. I love the visual of just dipping into it. I love those words. It makes it so easy. And Marijke, this has been such a fun conversation. I'm really glad that you came on, and I know that you're having some challenges in your life, and you made this time to do it. And congratulations on 40 years of marriage. I think that's very amazing.
Thank you.
And it's not just marriage. It sounds like you really have created a very wonderful...
It's a commitment,
Yeah, right. And you have an intimacy and a vulnerability with your partner that you didn't have before. And you know, that's something that most people don't ever accomplish. So good for you.
Thank you. Well, it's an ongoing thing we work on.
It is.
And fail at, too.
It is ongoing. Yes, it is. So, well, thank you for everything. We'll have all of your links and everything on the show notes. And I just know that this was a really fun podcast for everyone to listen to. And I appreciate everyone who joined us today. And I now close the Spiritual Forum.